Um, so I just want to just kind of briefly share why I became very interested in creating future artifacts and kind of the challenge I had and what I learned. And maybe some of you can resonate with this, but I working in foresight previously for WGSN and then as an independent, I felt challenged. I felt like our regular future forecasting practices were very prescriptive, and also being so involved with climate crisis advocacy, I felt our current ways were not inspiring action enough because they weren't immersive enough. Somehow I felt like we needed to feel, smell, see, touch what the future could be, feel it more in the present tense. And so I gradually learned that this was actually a desire that could be catered to through the practice of creating future artifacts that you can find in fields like speculative design, design fiction, and experiential futures. And there are strategies and examples out there. And to be honest, at first, I did not know what I was doing and what it meant. It was more almost like a creative exercise because I love to write and I'm a designer. And I would say very much creating future artifacts for me started with writing. And but this practice of creating a future artifact actually gave me a lot of hope, especially at a time when the climate crisis and just the poly crisis itself is a little bit daunting. And also what I loved about it is that as a forecaster, you're always looking at what other people are doing, but creating a future artifact calls on a different muscle. And I felt the creativity inside me really awakening, and it kind of renewed my love of future foresight, because I guess I was becoming a little bit disillusioned with the constant churning of new trends and our obsession with the new. So fast forward to today, and this idea around future world building is something that we're working on at the Trend Atelier, and it's part of our community ethos. And it's wonderful to have you here on our very first Tutoring Lab. We used to have these monthly live sessions with the students of the school, and now it's a new format that's open to everyone. So it's wonderful to see so many new names, so many new faces, but also welcome everyone from the community. And I can see some collaborators have joined, so it's amazing. And so I know that we have a whole bunch of experience in the room on future foresight. So I really can't wait to explore this with you. And I really hope this session will be inspiring, or, we'll come out of it all with neural pathways slightly readjusted. And so I do have one suggestion, and that is to just participate fully in the session. Just put your phones aside if you can, put your email window aside. And we want to hear from all of you. This is an experiential activity, so try if you can to turn your camera on, but no worries if you don't feel like it, or if you can't, maybe you're on the train, like someone mentioned in the chat, they're on the train. You use emojis, use reactions, put things in the chat. And yeah, so let's get started. How's everyone feeling? Should we get started then? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I will share my screen now. Just need to. So why create a future artifact as a critical skill to develop in your future foresight work? I guess classical future foresight doesn't necessarily lead to breakthroughs. It's important work, but creating a future artifact is not about creating a future forecast or a future report or a proposal. And it's not necessarily a strict methodology with rules and a set destination. So it's not about this is not a conversation where it's about having, very specific instruments to carry this out. And it's not necessarily about creating a new product or service, although certainly creating a future artifact might inspire ideas. It's more about seeing the world and thinking differently, and interrogating our world and challenging assumptions. And it really actually is very much about embracing doubt and uncertainty as a strategy, because creating a future artifact requires you not to have a final destination. It's really about also creating an artifact from the future, you're walking into this future, into this context, into this scenario, whether it's visual, written, auditory, smell, and it just raises questions and ideas, and it raises dialogue. So the reason I think it's important for us all to really raise the decibel of how we use these tools in the future foresight world is because it really transforms our ideas around the future into a future that we see it, we feel it, and that way we really empathize with it, and that way we're less likely to colonize the future with ideas that are not sustainable. And what's really great about future artifacts also is that it often taps into very familiar objects or situations that you then that might take on a very unexpected route or aspect as a consequence of something unexpected, of unexpected changes. And so you through a future artifact, you also communicate a whole scene, a whole context, and it really helps you understand the inner workings of a normal day in society on a certain day, whether it be in 4 years or 50 years. And so in that sense, it inspires more ethical insights and choices around the future that you actually want to create. And so it allows us to really work in the future rather than treat the future as this other thing. And in that sense, it's quite different to what we're used to in traditional foresight. And so far, these practices were quite marginal. And when we talk about futures design or speculative design, world building, experiential futures, but it really points to a shift in building futures around speculation and multiple futures, rather the sort of traditional way we've seen around this is the prediction, this is going to be the color, this is going to be the product that's going to sell. And it's more about transformations in livelihoods. And in fact, these imaginary futures perhaps are more plausible than ever as change is happening so fast. And so creating a future artifact is also about, in a way, dreaming future realities as a very pragmatic strategy. And I really believe that organizations, brands, you name it, that embed design fiction, speculative design, and world building into their frameworks and how they approach the world and the future will have a much deeper and probably much more ethical and lived understanding of what they face and how they want to contribute to hopefully a better future. And obviously, I just want to say that we live in a world that's dominated by big data, and certainly in foresight, this is something that we want to leverage in terms of understanding aspects of behavioral and cultural shifts. But creating a future artifact is different because it's very much about embracing uncertainty and imagination as a strategy. And so you're creating an object in the future, and in a way you're bringing it back with you. You're traveling to the future. And this is very hard and it's very challenging because we often question how good we are at creating or at imagining. But my experience of doing workshops around this, or attending workshops from other people, or leading workshops like this, is that it's amazing what unfolds when people really open that side of their practice and how they utilize their brain. And it's funny because we're very used to archaeologists using artifacts that they've dug out or that they've reconstructed from archaeological digs to help us really understand what life might have been like, say in Rome, however many thousands of years ago. And so we're kind of doing that, but we're reverse engineering it and we're doing it for the future rather than for the past. So today, obviously, I'm going to have examples of what other people are doing, and also some advice on how you might get started on this practice. And obviously, for those of you who are really well experienced at this, would be amazing to know what you think as well. But this is something that I've learned, and also that I was very inspired by the work of the futurist Stuart Candy, if you want to look him up. But he kind of talks about this in his work, that if you want to, what will help also, you look at the future from the perspective of design fiction or experiential futures or speculative design or world building. There are a lot of words floating around at the moment in these different kind of practices within the field of foresight. Is that it's really, I think it's important, and this helps also when we look at hype and the phenomenon of hype, is that the future context is not the same as the present, and the future is often very different from what we anticipated. That certainly the future is not necessarily an amplified version of the present. Um, so that's important, because oftentimes when we think of a future artifact, we might think of something that everyone is talking about, like an AI powered world with robots everywhere or driverless cars everywhere. But that's actually someone else's vision of the future, and that's what everyone else is talking about. It might not be, you might want to like push your imagination harder and live out your own dream about the future that is still, based on your research and your experience. The other thing is that the future is plural, and that's a very important way of approaching the ethical side of creating future artifacts, because it's about harnessing the what if for the what should, and also whose future. And so it's really about a long-term commitment to testing multiple possibilities, and as such, looking at multiple futures, because my future for I think it was Olga in Abu Dhabi, our future, is different. Everyone's future is going to be slightly different. And the other thing is that it's emotive, and I really strongly believe in that we often fail to implement fast enough because we represent futures as dislocated from us and sort of novel. But we have to create this type of emotional breakthrough that comes through as if we were living in this future. And it's purely fiction, and it's purely about exploring an idea. It's all made up, but it's not fantasy. That's the very important thing to understand. It's imagination, but it's not fantasy. And often it uses aspects of what we know about our present. So we might think that, oh, this future artifact is gimmicky, it's stepping way too far away from reality. And that maybe I'm just being way too self-indulgent with my creativity, indulging myself with these creative ideas. And we have to give ourselves permission to break away from reality. And the thing about creating a future artifact is it's also about touching things, touching objects, or sort of touching that future and trying to make meaning out of these artifacts to contribute to bigger conversations about society and the future. So I read this recently, and it's in a really great article by Karina Angelou. It's on Medium, and you can look it up. It's called Design X Futures, Design Futures. This is a quote from her, and she just talks about how speculative practices and designs are really about challenging our assumptions and our biases about the world, and help us understand how we are using our own power, privileges, agency. And she just talks about how important it is to use this in policy making, and also in just the way we design. So I highly recommend you look up this article. So I'm just going to like list a couple of examples to hopefully like get our juices flowing. And so, but I actually had a prompt actually. I just almost forgot for a minute, but I wanted to ask you in the chat if you could just tell us really fast, like what you're hoping to learn, today. Would be really great to know, even if you're already experienced, maybe you're trying to lubricate something more, but would be amazing to know. So, so 1 second, just trying to navigate. Okay, so This is actually, I hope you can read well enough, but I recently, and was a coincidence, but there was actually a mini workshop hosted by the Institute for the Future on creating a future artifact. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. Perfect. I'm going to see like how they do it, what they do, since I'm hosting this session as well. And they shared in the session this sign that they have at their offices. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the Institute for the Future. And so this is a future artifact. So this is a sign, a toilet sign posted outside a bathroom at the Institute for the Future. But if you read it, it's actually a sign from 2027. And it's in a future where um, what what comes out of our toilets is analyzed for data. So that's like one example of a future artifact. But the one that I also really loved was this Syntherian menu, and it's this idea that in the future we will be eating synthetic foods because we will have run out of some of the natural ingredients that we're used to, and so a lot of our food will be bioengineered. And so that's kind of an idea around a future artifact example that is pulled from something very casual, something that we maybe wouldn't even pay attention to, like a sign in a tube or a metro line, or a menu. Could be a report card, could be so many different things. This is another example of a future artifact created by Extrapolation Factory, which was called Climate Futures 2021. What kinds of climate action do the next generation envision? And so this was an experience. A lot of these future artifact projects are often collaborative as well. So these were future artifacts actually created after working with roughly 30 youths from Bronzeville and Rockford in the USA. And through the project, these youths dreamed up social and technological inventions that responded to climate change. And then the team at Extrapolation Factory translated the students' vision into these life-size objects. So you can see this phone booth that's transformed into a clothing printer, or this small device that looks like a pillar where you can generate energy from waste. And so the project aimed to increase awareness about the consequences of climate change and how that might affect our daily lives, obviously, and also reflect the hopes and dreams of the community they worked with, and engage with this community in new conversations around climate change and energy transition. So I'm just going to read the chat really fast to see what everyone's shared. Andrea says, I'm just curious about speculative design and future artifacts. Tammy, you said it would be great to understand the difference between normal trend forecasting and futures, the process that one needs to go through. I would like to see what new creative ways there are to think about and create future artifacts. Giselle saying I'm always curious to know what this will affect a design in the future. Amazing. So thanks for sharing, everyone. And this is another project that, for those of you who even work in fashion, might be interesting. Oh, I see more chats coming through. I'll read them in a second. Lisa's saying, I'm curious about this subject and very new in it. I think it is very important to imagine the future in order to put actions in place today. Echo that. So Fiona Hamlin says, I'm a lecturer in textile design. We're exploring parallel worlds, what if, speculative design, amazing. Always interested in different people's insights and ideas to help me develop my thinking. Amazing. So this is a project that was actually co-led by Stuart Candy and Sada Verbakel, who's an innovation consultant. And so in 2020, and it got the award for speculative design by Core 77. So in 2021, the United Nations Development Program launched its annual innovation event under the banner Development and Its Futures. And it was really about having a big conversation about how the global landscape of development could look decades from now. And the brief was very interesting. So it was using experiential futures, which is a term that Stuart Candy actually came up with, and to bring a conversation around long-range alternative pathways, I'm quoting him, for global development to life for the UN Development Program. And so the process was that they interviewed a selection of panelists, some of them famous authors or policymakers or government members, and they interviewed them one-on-one in advance and then designed and sent an artifact from the future to each one of them to arrive at their homes the week before the event. And each gift, so essentially this artifact was a gift from the future. It drew inspiration from a seed of a preferred future that came through in this initial conversation. Stuart Candy and Seda Verbakel just noted certain things, and as a whole then decided to create these artifacts. And I guess they had challenges because this was during COVID, so they had to do a lot remotely during the, the real heart of the lockdowns. And also because they had to use existing cultural materials and symbols. As you can see, these are clothing, these are letters. So by definition, these were very recognizable and very familiar. And so in each artifact, they looked for ways to resonate with the current cultural context, maybe a specific location that the interviewee, the panelist was part of, and just offer a fragment of what their future could look like. And so I selected just like 2 examples out of this because I'll share the link later, but there's a number of examples for each project. But so the designs to the left, some of you might be familiar with Roman Snarik, sorry, I'm butchering his name. He's a public philosopher, author, and he wrote The Good Ancestor. And so this book, The Good Ancestor, highlights the importance of political innovation dealing with the decision-making structures, which actually in Future Foresight we're very involved with because we influence decision makers. And so from his home in Oxford, he was sent a thank you for service in the 2032 Oxfordshire Ancestors Assembly, which doesn't exist. This is something that they made up. And a robe was actually created, and as if it had been ritually worn by participants when deliberating the potential impacts of their decisions on future generations. And so they modeled the robe also based on Japan's recently developed future design process, which is something that they're implementing in their government. They're trying to design with several generations in mind. And what was touching about this future artifact is that the robe was actually sent to the author's teenage daughter, because his currently teenage daughter would be in her mid-20s by the time of this imagined future, thereby bringing the next generation directly into this story. And then you can see to the left the letter of congratulations that he received, and you can see it's dated 12th of March 2034. So that's in itself a future artifact. Another one that was quite powerful was, I'm going to try and play this. I hope you can hear it. So this is actually was part of an installation at the London Design Festival, and it was designed by the industrial design agency and foresight agency Arup, and it's called Abundance, and it essentially looked at life. It profiled life in London in 2065 after the event. We're assuming it's a flood. And they made a movie out of it, which there's only a clip here. but at the event, it was more like a 15-minute movie. But then you were taken into this exhibition room, which you can see I took some photos, and there were posters for the community of the life. So they went in great detail here to really profile this world. You can see this um, main character in the movie cultivating her own mushrooms in her kitchen, because this is a future where we're very reliant on growing our own foods due to food scarcity. She's cycling on a 3D printed kind of specialist cycling device with storage embedded in its construction. She's wearing clothing that's made from recycled parachutes. This was actually clothing that was designed for this by Christopher Rayburn. There, as you can see, there are posters kind of celebrating the event, and so this whole future scenario unveils. And in this particular scenario, you could say that this jacket in itself was a future artifact, and the whole movie and the whole scene was the scenario. But it essentially immersed you into a world where we would be having to rebuild post-climate collapse, and what life might look like and how we might live with resilience. And so this was quite a powerful example. And I found it quite moving as well, because it actually used present creations. So this sort of device where she's picking mushrooms out of it actually exists. The helmet that she's wearing on the bicycle, getting on her bicycle, actually exists. It's made of mycelium. So there's actually, it's bringing artifacts from today and projecting them into our future. And that's what I think is really important about creating future artifacts as well, to understand, is that it's also very much embedded in the present. And so I recently read this in an issue by some magazine called Infrastructure as Critique, which I highly recommend you read if you're interested in future economies. And they in the issue, they talked about smart visual culture. And I've never heard this use of words before, this combination, but it was just explaining how important visual culture is in order to adapt, and how visual cultural production is about taking a look at tomorrow's foreign infrastructures hiding just beneath the mask. So, of course, within creating future artifacts, there's an element that is very visual, very artistic. But there are different ways, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. You could explore this. But you might be someone working in foresight on a future scenario, and you might decide, if you have the budget or the ability, to stage the future scenario. So this is actually several years old. I think it dates back to 2015, if I'm correct. But you're taking a tour around a future London apartment that's radically adapted for living with the consequences of climate change. And the project is called Mitigation of Shock by Superflux. And you can see in this apartment, the dwellers are growing their own food. They have a lot of UV lights. They created this fake newspaper from the future, this future artifact. You can look at what they're reading. Pets as protein. I'm not sure what that means, but this is kind of trying to really go into detail into the context of this future world. So the book itself is a future artifact. This newspaper is a future artifact. And it kind of gives you an idea of the placemaking of just one object and everything it can say. And so I talked about smart visual culture and how obviously visual production is part of creating a future artifact, but it's not necessarily, and my entrance into creating future artifacts was actually very much through the written words, and storytelling. And so I started out several years ago first with the project with Days Beauty back in 2018, but this was a project we did back in 2021, in the fall of 2021 with Plurality Universities. And so it was done in collaboration with Fashion Act Now and which I was a member of, and Plurality University. And so in this case, Sarah Arnold, the head of Fashion Act Now, and I wrote a script. And the script was set forth in 2041 it was happening on November 26th. And we asked people in the workshop to really immerse themselves in the future. I'm just hearing that people can't hear the sound. But you can hear me speak. I just saw this in the chat. You can hear me speak, right? Okay, good. Sorry. Okay, so we wrote this script, and it set forth ideas around degrowth, community, fashion commons, new economies, creativity, and craft. And through this script that we told in the first person, we immersed our participants. And we told them, this is the present, the future is here. And it's 2041. The day is November 26th. And you're over a hill, overlooking your place of choice with a few people, discussing your relationship with clothing and how it has changed, because this project was specifically on clothes futures. And, the scenario went longer, we immersed people. And then our second activity is that we actually had what I called fashion triggers. And we actually have some here with us today. We have Susan Muncie, I think. So so what I did is I contacted a couple of members of the Trend Atelier community. I was like, we're doing this event with Plurality University, and I want you to be you, but in several years, and speak as if you were coming from the future. So I invited our fashion triggers to speak about their life in the future on that day and how they interact with clothing, their jobs, what they do, and to just tell their story. And then the activity was for participants to interview these fashion triggers from the future and interact with these people from the future. We suggested some questions that they could ask them, but if they didn't know where to start, like what has letting go of fashion done to your life? What in your wardrobe was valuable in 2021 but worthless today? We had like a couple of prompts to get people going. And I really, really love this idea of becoming a future artifact, of embodying one. And this is something I recently did also for the Boston Consulting Group on a podcast called Climate Vision. If you want to check it out, it's called Green is the New Black, where I embodied a designer in 2050. So for those of you who might prefer writing, you can also write a future artifact. You can write a letter, you can write a scenario, you can get quite detailed in that. And so that's also what I did for Days Beauty, and that ensued with Lucy Bridge, who's a famous makeup artist who collaborated with a number of digital designers, took these future profiles I created, these kind of future artifacts, which reflected different beauty tribes over the next 100 years, and then created looks. And so you could say that each creation is a future artifact. So I'm going to kind of I want to spend time with you also sharing what a future artifact can be, but essentially, this is another example you can look at for those of you who are into fashion. It's called From Collectors to Creators, and it's a design fiction on our relationship with footwear in the future that would be fundamentally different. And you can see this is 2036, and Nike is leading a house of innovation and leading their cobbler summit. And this is a future where essentially we're all making our own shoes. And so the creator, Yu Yang, actually took projects that are currently existing and used them as research and as a basis. He used found footage, he used foresight frameworks to fully imagine this future service, product, organization, or system, and really use storytelling to bring people into his world. So I'll share a link to that later as well. And so Care Futures is another one where I used audio. So I wrote 3 different situations with 3 different set in 2032 in Oslo, 3 different people living 3 different moments on that day with very different contexts. And so I spoke about them out loud. Corinne Hanon, my creative researcher, also wrote her own scenario. She wrote The Hope Factory. She helped me with the research. Every single scenario was very much embedded in current insights, current research, and then we projected these stories, and these are available online, and I'll share the link as well. And so this was done through writing and through audio. And one of the comments we had when we ran this session was just how highly emotive it was. So how might you create a future artifact? And so I have a couple of tips, and I'm going to, if you want to take a picture of the screen, you can right now, and then I'll stop screen sharing for a second, just to kind of like interact with everyone. If everyone wants to take a picture, if not, I will share a replay. But so how does this like make sense? I'll go through kind of the tips, and hopefully we can like then discuss your questions. So the first thing would be to choose a scene in the future that because oftentimes it's our primary and our secondary research that will inform us. And, or perhaps it's a brief that you've created collectively with collaborators, or perhaps it's even a random formula. Maybe you're saying, okay, I'm in Amsterdam in 2029, I'm in a park, or I'm toasting bread in the future and getting ready to take my child to school. What does that look like? So, but you need to choose a scene, and I would advise you to kind of make it quite specific. Or what car will what does the car look like if you're, in case you're driving your kid to school? What everything looks like, what maybe what job you have, like just describe it. And yeah, so then the second thing you need to do is really describe that scene in detail, because it's through all of those details that you're indicating what this future will be like. And that's the future foresight part. So describe it in detail, because the detail is important also because that's what makes it that much more immersive. And you're trying to tell people who is going to inhabit this future, what's their gender, what's their mood, are they a parent, are they single, are they what's their job, where are they from, what does that feel like? What does the scene feel like? Is it dark? Is it full of light? Are there a lot of plants? Is it by a window? Is it smoky? Is it hard to breathe? Is it poetic? And also you want to describe what everyday actions look like. Are people flying with cars, or are they eating insects? How are they trading? How are they doing commerce? How are they traveling? How are they building things or purchasing things? What objects are in that scene? We saw in the previous example by some books or some newspapers that indicate what's happening in that future. Would it be that you're creating a poster, a flyer, or a piece of mail, or even perhaps a piece of furniture? And also think of the future artifact's name and its functionality. For example, I was looking at pictures from an exhibition, and there are these plates and hammers. Maybe your future artifact is a hammer, but that hammer is a future hammer, and it says so much about the future we live in. Maybe it's a hammer with a special AI reader, or so you want to really get specific about the functionality, and then you can focus on how this artifact is manifesting itself. Is it through the written word? Is it through a visual? Is it audio? Is it staged? Are you going to draw a picture of the artifact, even, for example, with Midjourney or DALI? Are you going to make up a menu or a logo or a new app? Are you going to, perhaps you could even create a mood board, taking from your current research from the web or your primary research or pictures in books or magazines. And, you know, I've even read suggestions and I've seen it in used by Superflux of just modifying current objects. For example, modifying a fork or a glass or modifying, household objects, modifying a toaster, you know, creating kind of a DIY prototype of the future. And this all might sound a bit complex, but it's actually in some ways very simple, because you're just creating one object in one moment in that future world. But it's through that simplicity and the selection of that one object and its context that you're actually saying so much about the future, and you're provoking so many conversations, and you're opening yourself up for discovery of glimpsing into this future. So that's really essentially my tips for getting started on creating a future artifact. So we have time for Q&A, but before we just jump into Q&A, I wanted to quickly say that I would like to send everyone the replay of this and also the links to this presentation. And I have a few additional things that I wasn't actually able to include just for time's sake, but I have a few additional examples I'd like to share. And so I'm inviting you, if you haven't already, to join the newsletter, because it just is simpler logistically to just sign up for the newsletter. You can unsubscribe later if you want to, but yeah, this is the link in the chat to sign up to the newsletter. And then I would love to be able to obviously share this with you and you know, continue the conversation. So would anyone like to come forward and just share a question they might have or an observation? It would be amazing to start dialoguing. We have a little over 10 minutes. I know some of you said that for those of you who may be logged in a bit later, we had a poll and it said that 19% of our group were very familiar with creating a future artifact. 56% were mildly familiar, and 25% were not at all. Actually, I'll share the results right now just so I can share the results. So, so would anyone like to come forward? You don't have to turn your camera off, but are there questions you might have? This is a good time for us to exchange. Maybe there's something I failed to mention. Hi, Andrea. Great to see you. Thank you so much. Maybe I can see in the chat what was said. Melvin is saying, I'm doing my master's in design futures, and this subject is a part of my module in the university at the moment. Amazing. Is there anything you'd like to share, Melvin, with us in terms of your experience? Because I think you're probably been more like academically trained on this, it sounds like. Actually, the project I showed you about the cobbler, this future Nike cobbler symposium was done as part of a university project on the similar kind of program. I think Pami has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Pami?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks so much for this session. It's been really great to see all the examples and everything. I just wanted to sort of I guess it's more of a comment than a question. I used to teach trend forecasting. I'm actually an academic. I teach design management and fashion industry analysis at university. And one of my modules was trend forecasting, and I tried to incorporate this very a long foresighted approach to trend forecasting to undergraduate students, and I found it really difficult to explain it in a way that they could make use of the information that I'd given them, all the usual strategic foresight, etc. And I just wondered whether you had any tips or experiences where it was more successful than my own efforts, and how to explain this whole business about the importance of long-term forecasting as opposed to the next season or the next collection. That was really all I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me personally, when I've taught this, it's just trying to make a differentiation between macro trends, mega trends, and short term and close to season trends, or some people call micro trends those close to season trends, but technically micro trends are 2 to 3 years, and macro trends are 5 to 10 years. And I just try to use visual frameworks and uh, explain why explain this. I'm not saying it correctly, but the cone of plausibility and certainty, and explain how farther out we go into the future, how much more we need to use our imaginations. But innovators tend to live much more in this far future. And it's hard to explain all in one go, but I tried to use visual frameworks. I tried to get them very inspired by what innovators were doing. And I tried to show through these examples how innovators live in that future. And I tried to surprise them with what the future might be. And that's how I've done it. And I've shared the hunt, identify, gather model that I created, which is very visual, just showing trend molecules. So I know some people do the other models, use the pestle model, and but I've never really done that because they're heads of the course or main course leaders were already teaching them that. And does that help at all?
Yeah, thank you. That does help. And I think from my perspective, I really enjoyed looking at the visual aspects, and the imaginative sort of approach to thinking about the long-term futures, which I think is a really, as you say all along, it's a really useful way of thinking about the long term. So yeah, I
I
mean, all of what you
I try
said.
also, like, for me, I think my experience with students is that they're often very concerned with the environment and sustainability. So I try to also say, if that's what you're into, long-term futures is where it's at. Like, you need to focus on the long term. And that kind of resonated with them as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
making it visual and attractive did help, but it was very much also about telling them a story, almost as if I lived it too, and showing them tools, but also taking them through my process seemed to get a better reaction. So I think, does anybody else have any questions otherwise in terms of future artifacts? I don't know if Melvin is still with us, but I'm really curious about you,
I'm
Melvin, and what you're studying. It sounds really interesting.
I'm right here. I'm right here. Sorry. I, I'm in the library, so I couldn't access. I couldn't be talking, so I had to come outside to actually have a conversation. So I'm studying hair and makeup design futures at Southampton, and
Oh,
for me,
yeah.
this is a whole different concept. I've just been practicing hairdressing since past 12 years back home before I came to UK, and so for me, this is a whole new concept. And the tutor keep pushing us to get better. And so this is one of the first seminars I attended outside university in regards to this subject. So it's totally new. It's a little too what would I say, challenging, because I'm used to, we used to doing the same thing in the salon, where okay, this is the typical style you want. This speculative is very in futures and something that comes. So basically, we are like the trendsetter. And if I look in the perspective of hair and beauty, so till now, all my guidance in regards to speculative is all on the WGSN, which is
Yeah.
the directory where we look out for future styles. So I am totally new to the whole concept. So it's good to see from a different point of view there are more people who are actually looking into this. And
I don't mean to do a
and I
plug.
think speculative, yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna do a plug of my
Sorry.
own work. So I don't mean to be like, but I think your course leader and I have spoken, and she knows my work, but I've done a lot of speculative stuff around beauty for
Yeah.
Days Beauty. So I'm just sending the link to the articles. You might like them. But yeah, it's very, very foreign.
Yes,
And
the articles and links will help a lot.
it's very foreign, this notion of future of design fiction. There's all these different words also floating around. There's design fiction, speculative design, experiential futures, world building. I'm missing some futures design. And so I think we have to remember also to have fun and be imaginative and imagine the future, and also make it collaborative. I think the best times it's worked is when it's also engaging with others. And so I would say it's almost like when horses have one eye covered and one eye open. You want to look at what's happening in the world right now, but you also want to ignore it so that you can have your sort of like breathing airways open to anything unlikely or a wild card or even strange, because that's where the future might go. And it's also about multiple futures. And it's not about saying this is going to be the future, this is a forecast. This is not a forecast. This is a future artifact that's just designed to make you think about what the future might be. Imagine 50 years ago, someone had created, or 30 years, no, let's say 40 years ago, someone had created a future artifact that looked a bit like a phone. It looked a bit like a smartphone today. And everyone would be like, you're absolutely out of your mind. I do not know what you're talking about. And now look at our lives today. So, and look how much they've changed just through the creation of that small device. So it's kind of like, that's what's great about future artifacts. But I think we're running out of time. And Sveti, I saw that you had your hand raised. I don't know if you had a question. I'm happy to stay on a few more minutes, but otherwise you can just email me. So I think we're closing off. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And yeah, don't forget to sign up to the newsletter. It's both my and the Trend Atelier's newsletter. It's easier to combine them. I'll just put the link in the chat again, and that way you can get the replay and the links. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Pami. It was amazing to see new names, new faces. So excited to be hosting this new session, and have a really great day. We can say goodbye in all our respective languages. Bye, Olga from Abu Dhabi. Au revoir, au revoir, au revoir. Bye.